What you are looking at is Mahon, Minorca. Maybe some of you are familiar with it because you've been there on vacation. Yet this holiday Balearic island is perhaps the least known. But take note, because despite being the quiet island, it also has its curiosities. Did you know that it was in Minorca that the US established nothing less than its first naval base abroad between 1815 and 1848? The first in history. So 200 years before the first McDonald's opened on this island, the warships of the emerging Yankee superpower were already sailing there. And you know what? The port of its capital, Mahon, has just become the third NATO assistance naval base in Spain. It joins a list that also includes the Rota and Cartagena bases. And you're probably thinking, why is this Spanish island so important that we're dedicating a whole video to it here on VisualPolitik? Well, pay attention because it has a lot of importance. The Bay of Mahon is probably the most important strategic point in the Western Mediterranean. We're talking about the second largest natural harbour in the world, behind only Pearl Harbor. It's 5.5 kilometers long, 1.2 kilometers wide, and 20 meters deep. It also has large fuel and water tanks, as well as underground tunnels, the perfect place to support warships. As a result, Minorca will be a new key point for the logistics of the Atlantic Alliance, both in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. From now on, it will be common for huge military ships from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France to pass through this bay. These ships will bring with them new jobs and a lot of money. But of course, the criticisms have not been long in coming. In certain political circles, mentioning NATO and the United States is like mentioning the plague.
We believe that it is an attack against the sovereignty of our island that has been made with the approval of the Spanish government to use Minorca as the playground for the United States. We feel like puppets of a state that does not respect us as a people.
Despite the criticism, denying this port assistance to NATO is almost impossible for Spain. Throughout history, Mahon has been an important port for the Phoenicians, Greeks, Carthaginians, Romans, Byzantines, Muslims, French, and also, of course, the English. The great powers fought over its dominance like children over a piece of candy. In fact, until relatively recently, and like Gibraltar, the island was dominated by the British. The Royal Navy turned this place into its Mediterranean center of reference for almost a century. From Minorca, they chased pirates, controlled their trade routes, and made sure that no other country could overshadow the British Empire. And do you know what? Some good evidence of this is that the island's star product is Mahon gin, which was first produced to serve to English sailors. Well, I lie. There's another star product that I'm sure you know, mayonnaise. Or rather, Mahonnaise. The most famous sauce in the world was invented here. Or at least that is what most historical experts agree on. And you will say, but Josh, isn't mayonnaise French? Yes, but no. And no, we're not going to talk about cooking in this video. We're telling you about it because its invention in Minorca coincides with the time when the French occupied the island. And why were they occupying it? Well, again, for strategic reasons. And now, with the Gaza war raging, with the growing tension between Iran, the United States, and Israel, along with Putin's threat on the shores of the Black Sea, this forgotten Balearic island is once again important. Up until now, Spain has despised its military use, largely because it also has despised its own military, but that's another story. Of course, this was not always the case. Until the 1990s, the island was full of Spanish military. Proof of this is the fortress of La Mola, equipped with 2 Vickers 381 cannons that are the largest caliber in Spain, and that need no fewer than a team of 15 people to be fired. As you can see, this island is fascinating. These days, it's little more than a tourist destination thanks to its magnificent white sand beaches. But if you go, you can't help but bump into its history. Having said that, why does Minorca matter to NATO itself? Well, to answer this question, I have to show you a place. This is the Mediterranean Sea, the cradle of Greek civilization, ancient Egypt, the Phoenicians, and the Roman Empire. I think you all have an idea of how important this sea has been for the history of mankind. But wait a minute, we're not only talking about the past. Sometimes we forget, but today, this sea is still absolutely key to global security and economy, and above all, logically, for the old continent. Nearly 65% of all the oil and gas consumed in Europe passes through here, and every year, nearly 100,000 cargo ships, many from Asia, pass through its waters. In other words, if there were a problem in these waters, those in Europe would be left in the dark, and without many supplies they are used to having. And VisualPolitik community, the point is that right now, there are 3 threats we need to be aware of. The first, if any of you are watching us from Southern Europe, you're sure to be sick of seeing news items like this.
The irregular entry of migrants into the EU through the central Mediterranean reaches record highs. Arrivals grow by almost 300% so far this year and register record levels.
The Mediterranean is to Europe what the southern border is to the United States, and this is entirely understandable. Africa's population is exploding, to the point that by 2050, it will exceed 2.4 billion. That's a quarter of the entire world population. What's more, if in 1980, 1 in 10 of the world's population was African, many experts, including the United Nations, already point out that Africa's population will account for nearly 40% of the total by the end of this century. Come to think of it, by the end of the century, more than half of all births will take place in Africa. There's no region in the world right now whose population is growing so rapidly. So what does all this mean? Well, a huge demographic bomb is in the making. Tens and tens of millions of young people will be born in very poor countries and will dream of reaching the rich world. And what will they have closest to them? Indeed, Europe. Only the Mediterranean will be in their way. And that is why everything indicates that the flow of people trying to reach Europe aboard boats and canoes and rafts of all kinds will increase, if nothing is done to stop it. You laugh at the complaints about Trump and the immigrants at the southern US border compared to what's coming to Europe. It's a joke. And keep in mind, this not only poses a huge social and security challenge, it's also a huge problem from a humanitarian point of view. Logically, to cross a whole sea in a fourth-rate boat brings nothing but misfortunes like these.
At least 3,997 people died in 2023 at Europe's southern border.
Terrible. And it's not just about mass immigration. North Africa and the Sahel is one of the most troubled regions in the world. Warlords, jihadists, to which must be added that modern conflicts, such as the one in Gaza, are taking place on Mediterranean shores. Also, organized crime syndicates of all kinds are at ease. And, logically, the Mediterranean is the only thing that separates them from Europe. And then we have to add that many of the modern conflicts, such as the war in Gaza, Libya, and Syria, are taking place on these coasts. And then on top of that, we also have a lot of potential conflicts, such as Israel and Lebanon, or Algeria and Morocco. In other words, we are talking about a huge powder keg that could explode at any moment. If any of these conflicts, or any terrorist group, were to succeed in attacking ships, or cutting off, for example, the Suez Canal, the damage to global trade would be insane. And not only that, if a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran were to finally break out, something that seems less and less far-fetched, these waters would be absolutely key. Why? Because a large part of the supply, and many of the attack operations, would be initiated precisely from this area, from Minorca and its surroundings. Likewise, if a war were to break out in Asia, European reinforcements and much of the military power of the United States would have to pass through here. In fact, this is exactly what explains why both Russia and China have been trying in recent years to increase their position in Mediterranean waters. The Russians have tried to do so by taking over Syria, and the Chinese by pulling out their checkbook. Let's face it, whichever way we look at it, there's no need to talk about the Phoenicians. The Mediterranean is strategically vital for Western security in the 21st century as well. And it's precisely NATO that's been running the Operation Sea Guardian for several years, an operation whose ships will call in at where? You got it, Mahon. But don't think we're done. We are left with perhaps the most important point of all. Critical infrastructure. You see, a large part of the oil and gas consumed in Europe crosses the Mediterranean. But take note, we're not only talking about huge ships, but also about huge pipelines. Nearly 17% of all gas consumed in Europe comes from Algeria. And as things stabilize in Libya, this country will also become very important in replacing imports from Russia. Of course, the vast majority of these shipments arrive via pipelines located under the seabed. What's more, in recent years, huge gas discoveries have been made under the waters of the Mediterranean. Take a look. In 2000, 2 small natural gas fields were discovered a few kilometers off the coast of the Gaza Strip and Israel. In 2009, the Tamar field was located with estimated reserve of 10 trillion cubic feet of gas. And in December 2010, the Leviathan field, an even larger field with about 20 trillion cubic feet of gas, was found. These discoveries have made Israel not only self-sufficient in natural gas, but it has also begun to export it. That's not the end of it. Between 2011 and 2018, Cyprus also discovered significant gas fields, and in 2015, Egypt located Zohr, the largest gas field in the entire Mediterranean. Of course, exploration work continues, so new fields are likely to appear. In total, we're talking about some 2.4 trillion cubic meters of gas per year, the equivalent of about 7 years of the gas consumption of the whole of Europe. So of course, there are now plans to build new pipelines to carry much of this gas to European consumers. And do you know where these pipelines will go? Indeed, at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. But the question is, why are we telling you all this? Well, because I'm sure you all remember seeing news headlines like this.
Who blew it up? The great mystery behind the Nord Stream pipeline explosions. Finland attributes a leak in a gas pipeline connecting to Estonia to sabotage.
Well, imagine if Russia, for instance, wanted to raise the price of natural gas or cause significant damage to the European Union. All it would take is for a covert operation to damage any one of those pipelines. So of course, protecting all these facilities, as well as the large gas or oil tanker frameworks that pass through these waters, is a priority. But pay attention, we can't only talk about energy. There is another type of key infrastructure that is becoming increasingly important. What you are looking at is the enormous communications network that connects Europe with the rest of the world. We're talking about the massive cables that make the internet and communication between countries possible. They are the great information highways of the 21st century. Well, as you can see, the Mediterranean has become a huge hub for communications between Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. If these cables were compromised, communications would collapse. Conclusion, these waters could be the best theater of operations for those terrorist groups or those countries, Russia included, that would like to disrupt the European Union. And now, Mahon will play a key role in protecting common interests. Not bad for a small island of barely 100,000 inhabitants, is it? While Cyprus is perhaps the strategic Mediterranean island par excellence in the Eastern Mediterranean, as you have seen, Minorca could become a kind of counterpart in the Western Mediterranean. Should NATO need it, it would not be unreasonable to see more and more presence in its waters in the future. And who knows, maybe someday a military base will arrive. But while that is happening, it's your turn. Do you think Minorca really has the geostrategic potential to become an important military enclave in the future? Will NATO take advantage of this island to increase its presence in the Western Mediterranean, which is one of the alliance's weakest locations? Well, leave us your opinions below in the comments and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, please don't forget to give us a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any news. It's a small gesture that really helps a lot. As always, thank you so very much for being there. All the best. I will see you next time.